In this video, we'll just be tackling the head, while also learning about things like what topology is and why we need to care about it. Let's get into it. For the hands and head, we're going to do something special. The hands will be their own beast later, so just make them as big as you might want them to be. For the head, let's actually separate it from the rest of the body so we can add some special modifiers to it. You can do that by hovering over it and pressing L, which will select all linked parts, and then P to separate by selection. Now it's back to being its own object. What we need to do is add a subdivision surface modifier, so it'll be rounded out. Turn the levels up to 2. So why do we want to do this when we could have just added a sphere from the start? Well, to explain that, I'll have to explain one of the most important concepts in all of 3D modeling: topology. Topology is basically just a term that describes how faces on the model are organized, instead of the actual shape they make. Look at these 3 spheres. They all look exactly the same, right? Well, if we look at them all in edit mode, we can see that they actually have completely different topology. The first one is the default UV sphere, which you can add as a primitive object, which works in a lot of cases. But as you can see, it has this weird pinch section at the top and bottom, which can make some things annoying. The third one is called an icosphere, which is just a sphere made of triangles. You don't usually want to see triangles or tris in your 3D model, although models for games do usually use them instead of squares or quads. In the middle is the Goldilocks zone of topology. It's all squares, but there are no sections that are weirdly pinched. It's all pretty evenly sorted out. This is the subdivided cube we just made, and it's generally a lot more useful for character modeling, especially simplified characters like the one we're making. When you're making complex models that are going to bend, like a rigged character model, it's important to make all the faces on the object work optimally to fit whatever shape you're going for, since some shapes are so much easier to achieve if you sort out the faces in a specific way. For characters, places like the eyes and the mouth are the most important places to have good topology. For more complex characters, we usually need their faces to be fully built out, but since our guy is pretty simple, we could just cut some holes in this rounded cube. So now that we have the head subdivided, we can mess with some of the proportions before we apply the subdivisions, so we can edit even more points. We'll need to add just a couple of loops though. Add 2 horizontally, and scale them down vertically so they sort of pinch the middle area. We'll need some more definition on the sides, so add a loop there too. Then pull the faces around the eye and forehead back, so we have a slight notch where the eyes will meet the cheeks. You'll need to stick the verts on the modified model by clicking this little triangle button on the subdiv modifier, called the onCage button. But since this isn't technically where the verts actually are, it might actually feel a bit weirder compared to editing it normally. We can exaggerate this notch using one of my favorite features, edge creases. Select these verts of the edge, and in the pull-out menu, go down here to crease and set it to 1. You can also use Shift-E to add the crease. This overrides the subdiv modifier and makes the edge we selected perfectly sharp. You can set it to numbers less than 1 too if you want a less sharp edge. This looks a bit weird, but we can fix that later. Now just move around all these verts to fit the reference. Some parts will need to be edited in full 3D view without the full reference, so swap back and forth to make sure it looks good in all views. You can use Alt-S to quickly scale out parts like the cheek and give it back its volume. If you don't get it perfect now, you can edit it later. Now here's where I have to pause the video and give you some unfortunate news before we get too deep into this. The biggest problem with every tutorial ever is that I, as the more experienced artist, just know from muscle memory and practice what looks best for the model, and you as the beginner do not. So even when I'm telling you to move this here or there and do whatever, there's a solid chance that your result won't look as good as mine, just because you don't have the muscle memory and experience to do it the exact right way, even with a reference. It's just how things go when you're learning things, so don't get discouraged. The more you make models, the more you'll realize, well, that looks so much better if I do this instead, and you'll be making better and better models over time. When I was starting out, I skipped right to character modeling instead of learning the muscle memory of making simpler models. So my first ever model turned out like this. I was pretty proud of it at the time, but obviously my modern eye thinks it looks like the worst thing ever. But over time, I learned more and more, and made even newer versions of this model. Now she looks like this. Personally, I think this is one of my better models overall. All it took was time and experience, and grinding away at making new models as I felt like I learned more. That's pretty much the path that every 3D artist has gone down, so you'll be going down it too, just as long as you keep at it. And don't forget that the path isn't linear at all. She looks great, but I have a couple of characters that I want to make models of, but I can never seem to get right. You're never free from trouble, you just have to keep plowing through it. Okay, back to the head. So what we want to do now is apply the subdiv modifier, so we have all of its new verts to work with. But what we should do first is duplicate our head in this state by right-clicking it or hitting Shift-D. So if we screw something up, we can resort back to it later. Make sure to hide the old head by going into the outliner and clicking this eye icon. So to apply the modifier, you first need to be in object mode. Then, in this little drop-down arrow menu on the modifier you want, select Apply. You can also hover over it and press Ctrl A if you want. So apply the subdiv, but something went wrong. It now looks super sharp in the middle. That's because when you apply something, it has to move it to the top of the modifier stack in order to make it real. So if we move the subdiv up, you can see that's what it looked like when things went wrong. It's an easy fix though. You can just apply the mirror modifier too, and then add it back in later. So apply the mirror, and then apply the subdiv. Now in edit mode, we can split the head in half to set up for another mirror modifier. We can alt-click the center loop of the head, then press V to split that edge. Then we can hover over it and press L to select the half we want to delete, and then delete it. Now we can add the mirror back in, and everything is back to being how it should be. Now if we go back to edit mode, you can see all the new verts that the modifier added, which can be edited manually. But that sounds more annoying, right? Well, not if we use proportional editing. Down in this menu, which might be at the top side of the viewport, but mine is at the bottom, select this circle icon in the middle. Now when we move a vert, it'll drag along the surrounding verts as well. You can even scroll up or down while moving something to increase or decrease the influence range. This is what you need when making larger, more vague edits to a mesh with lots of verts, like this one. If you made a lot of edits to the shape of the face, you're going to want to reduplicate the head and delete the old one. Now here's where a pretty big path can diverge. I want to teach you how to make a mostly fully modeled face, but don't forget that that isn't the only way to make a character. My avatar's whole face is just a sphere with some fancy images set up, so I can have him look around and make expressions and stuff, as well as have an animated mouth that responds to my voice. If that general vibe speaks to you more, there are tutorials about how to set that up. In fact, I made some a while ago to set it up exactly like I have it. They are a bit too advanced if you really are a newbie to a lot of stuff in Blender, so you should definitely get through this tutorial first at least. But just know you can import drawings into Blender and shrink wrap them to the face, literally using the shrink wrap modifier. That is definitely easier than dealing with topology, but this tutorial won't be about that method specifically. I just want to tell you that it's an option. Now what we need to do is cut out holes for the eyes and mouth. You can select individual verts, but I might as well show you something new. Down in the bottom left, again it could be top left, you can see these 3 buttons, which will let you change your selection mode to verts, edges, or faces. If we switch it to faces, you can see we can select a whole face without having to select all 4 verts around it. So try selecting this general area of the face, and delete faces, so it leaves a hole. For the mouth, maybe around here, and delete faces. We want the area we delete to be bigger than the size of the actual eye we're going to have in the end, since we're going to add more back in. Switch back to vert select mode, and then alt select the open edge we made, and then using a super important shortcut when modeling, E for extrude. There's also the extrude region tool, but you extrude a lot when modeling, so try to learn the shortcut. As you can see, it'll create a loop of faces from where we have selected. It'll follow your cursor, but we actually want to shrink it inward. So right click to cancel any movement. The loop is still there, it's just on top of the old edge. We want to scale it in, but because we have proportional editing on, it's pulling along the old edge. So make sure you turn that off and then scale. Now we have a solid loop around the eye. This is the loop we want to edit to form the actual shape of the eye. Having a loop like this around the eye is generally a good idea, which is why we're doing it like this. Trying to achieve a good eye shape would just be a little bit harder if we didn't add the loop. Now I can just pull that whole loop into the reference's eye shape. But we're messing up the perfect roundness of the face. That's the thing we can fix later when using the duplicate head we made, so just keep pressing on and getting the eye shape how you want it. The previous loop is so far removed from the shape we're aiming for, but we could easily make it conform better. Select the eye loop, and we can use numpad plus to increase the selection, so we can use the smooth tool and smooth out all of this area. If you don't have a numpad, then you can just alt select the same verts, or you can just change the shortcut and edit preferences key map. The smooth tool is insanely useful, as you can guess. If we click this little pin and drag it to the right, it'll smooth out what we have selected to make it closer to what's around it. I'm going to get rid of the crease on the face, since we want it to be a bit smoother than that now. Now we can just start moving the smoother bit back to fit the reference. Looks like even when I trace over the old model for the reference, I didn't get it right. So I'll favor the front reference's eyes a bit more. Now let's get the mouth into shape. We want the mouth to be a basic, super flat, closed shape. Extrude, right-click to cancel the movement, and make sure proportional editing is off. Then scale inward. Obviously the mirror modifier is going to make stuff a bit weird here, so we'll just have to keep fixing it, since Alt-S doesn't give us what we want. Right now we can use the smooth tool again to round things out. So select the open loop, then numpad plus to increase the selection, so it can smooth down both that and the old loop. Even though it might feel slower, it is probably faster to just move each vert into place manually. Just make it slightly farther from the mouth line than you think. We'll close the mouth later. I'll make it so each vert on the top lip has a parallel vert on the bottom lip. It's not super necessary, but it is generally a good idea. Just keep following the reference. Or if it's slightly off, then just use your better judgment to change it however it looks the best to you. But it's hard to get it perfectly smooth again, so let me show you the special thing with the old head. It's really just a modifier we can use, the Shrink-Wrap modifier. We're going to basically glue the new head shape onto the old head shape, so it's as round as it used to be, while keeping the eye and mouth holes. First, just add the Shrink-Wrap modifier to the new head, and then in the target object space, you can either select the old head object's name, which should have a 003 in it, or if you unhide it by clicking that closed eye icon, you can use this eyedropper tool to just select it. Now the new head is copying the overall shape of the old head, but we still have our eyes and mouth there, which are now perfectly smoothed out. It'll mess up some things that we need to fix, but we're going to apply this, since we need to do some more things that the Shrink-Wrap modifier won't let us do. The Shrink-Wrap modifier often messes up with mirrored objects like this, so we need to fix that. Alt select the middle loop, and then with the move tool and clipping turned on, and the mirror modifier, move that edge all the way off to the left and then all the way off to the right. That'll hopefully glue each vert on the centered edge back together. Now I just need to fix back up some other parts, like the part under the eye with the smooth tool. For the mouth, we can smooth these loops out too, but let's edge slide these parts in, which we can use with the tool or the shortcut double tap G or GG. G is normally the shortcut for moving, but if you double tap it, the verts will lock onto their edge, so you can just move them up their edge instead. That'll let us balance it out a bit more. Also, since I want to use proportional editing with the top of the mouth and not the bottom, I can click this drop down to the right of the proportional editing button and then toggle connected only so it won't jump across gaps and grab those verts too. I usually have that toggled on. Now we're done with the old head, so we can get rid of it. Now let's do one thing that the Shrink-Wrap modifier would have stopped us from doing, the nose. Just grab these few verts near the center, extrude, and scale inward. I'll add a new loop in the middle of the nose, so I can slope it down like in the reference. To see how it'll look in the end, let's add back in a new subdiv modifier. We can also go back to object mode, and with the head selected, right click and select shade smooth. Now we can edit the smooth model. If we select the base parts of the nose, we can add another edge crease, so it exaggerates the shape more. Here's one optional thing you can do. As you can see, even though the edge is fully creased, the smooth shading is making it look smoother than it should be. We can fix this by selecting the creased edges we want to be sharp, and then down here under Edge, select Make Sharp. Like how creases override the subdiv modifier, this overrides the shade smooth effect, but you might prefer it the other way too, so it's just if that's the kind of thing you want. Now let's build the inner parts of the eyes and mouth. The eye is easy. Extrude, click, but without scaling, move it a bit inward. This is where these square bits on the move tool come in handy. Since it smoothed out the edge a lot, you can add a crease. I'll not add it to the bottom though, so it's smoothed out there still. Also, if you're wondering how I'm turning off the view of the verts, it's just this button down here. I set its shortcut to be Z since I use it a lot, but by default it's Shift-Alt-Z. So at that point you might as well just click the button. The mouth will take a bit more consideration since we'll actually see the inner part when it opens. Alt select the loop and extrude directly in, but not too far, since this is going to be the thickness of the lip, which isn't that thick. Now we want the inner part to fan out, so extrude again, scale up just a tiny bit, and then scale up on the Z axis a lot more. Rotate it forward so it doesn't clip through the jaw, and smooth it out a bit so it looks nicer. Now we're pretty much home free, since even though this will sometimes be visible, you don't need to be that precious about it. Extrude farther back in the mouth. Then extrude again, but this time we want to close the back. So with this new loop selected, press M to merge all the selected verts together at their center. Then move the new center vert to the middle so it glues to the other mirrored vert. That's all we need to do for that, but we might want to make it bigger once we model the teeth and tongue. Now we want to fully close the mouth, so where this part of the lip is, Control R to add an edge loop. This time we actually want to see these verts cross over, so use the scale tool until the loops cross over. There's a bit of an overbite, so move the bottom lip forward with connected proportional editing. Then, since I think it looks nicer, let's pull back the edges of the mouth into the head a bit. Maybe doing the same with the whole mouth too. Before we add on all the other parts, let's actually get rid of some of these loops, since we already figured out what loops are absolutely necessary to make the shape of the eyes and mouth. It's way easier to make an appealingly smooth model if you have less loops to deal with. To delete them right, make sure you select the loop you want to delete, and then dissolve edges. This will keep the faces in place, but remove the loop. Some of them extend all the way back down and around the head, so just be wary when you're deleting them. To help with getting the shape back how we want it, I'll quickly introduce you to Sculpt mode. Usually this mode is used for making super detailed models with extreme poly counts, but the tools are still very useful for making lower poly models like this one. First, in your Object Settings tab, in the Properties panel, turn on Wireframe Visibility and All Edges. When using these sculpting tools, they technically only affect vertices, so we need to know where the verts are to use them effectively. I mostly only use the Smooth tool to quickly smooth out some areas, as well as a couple of others. But the tool I actually wanted to introduce you to is the Relax Slide tool, which will save you tons of time and pain. By default, it just lets you scooch over a bundle of verts all at once, but what we actually want to do is hold Shift while using it. This very cleanly smooths out all of the verts without changing the shape of the model as much as the Smooth tool does. You might want the base Smooth tool as well, but for me, I usually just want to smooth out only the verts, not the shape, so Relax Slide is a lifesaver here, especially when it comes to more complex models than this. This pretty much is the last part where we really need to deal with the head, so take some time to fix it up. Again, this part is kind of hard to explain, and it'll be kind of annoying to follow everything I do, so just use your own judgment, mixed with what the reference shows. Now it's time to fill in all the other details of the head. Let's start with the eye, so we can add some more personality. For a character that's stylized like this, we can just use flat planes instead of spherical eyes. But to make this work with the irises we're going to make, let's actually add in a new separate object, which will be a plane. We want to mirror it, so make sure to go into edit mode and move the plane off to the left side so it doesn't overlap. Now add in the mirror and subdivision modifiers. And right click and shade smooth. In object mode, move the planes up to where the eyes are, just so the object's origin point is close to where the eyes will be in the end. Now we just need to add in a loop on both axes of the plane, and rotate it so it's matching the angle of the eye socket. And now just pull out the middle vert a tiny bit so we can emulate just a little bit of the eye's roundness. Now for the iris, let's add in another separate object, but this time a circle. It'll just be an empty loop of verts, so in edit mode, let's extrude, scale inward, and then M to merge at the center. We added so many loops because we want to shrink wrap this iris to the eye plane we just added, and the shrink wrap modifier works better the more vertices there are. Now A to select everything and move it to the left. Scale it down on the X a little bit so it's more of an oval, and do the usual mirror, subdiv, and shade smooth. Move the whole object up to the face, rotate it so it's relatively flat against the sclera. That's the term for the whites of the eyes. And now we can add the shrink wrap modifier. And select the sclera plane. It should be freaking out because it's in the exact same space as the sclera. So in the modifier settings, increase the offset just a tiny little bit, like 0.005. So it's still flat against the sclera, but technically on top of it instead. Now it looks great. Really quick, just for the iris, go into the material tab and give it a material. We won't be dealing with materials in full yet. We just want to make this material black in the viewport display, so it's easier to differentiate it in the rest of the body. Don't make it pitch black though, because then you won't be able to see any of the verts on it in edit mode. Just make it a dark gray. Also, I have an add-on that puts this section higher up, so yours might be lower. This is also a great time to pause, go through every object you have, and give it a name in the outliner. It's always better to name every object you have, so you don't have to guess what cube 28 is way down the line. I'll just call them head, eye, iris, and then body, even though we're going to join the head to the body later. Also, you can right-click to add a collection, which is great for sorting all these different parts. Just Shift or Control to select each object and drag them in there. Then you can name the collection after your character. And if you right-click it, you can even give it a special color icon. Since this is just a guy I'm making for the tutorial, I'll just leave it as is though. Also, don't forget to name the black material you made for the iris. And of course, save your model. We still have a lot to do, so keep saving. Back to the head parts, let's add some eyelashes so the general shape of the eye is differentiated from the rest of the head. Let's select however many verts we want around the edge of the eye, and Shift D to duplicate them, so we already have the shape of the eyelid sorted. Now P to separate into a different object, and name it eyelashes. You're going to want to keep up with naming things as you add them. Go into edit mode with just that selected, and then select everything with A, and extrude out some shape to it. For some reason, doing this reverts back to shade flat, so reapply shade smooth. You can also do this in edit mode by selecting everything, then at the bottom, going to face, and then shade smooth. Then you can see it screws up another way. It's good that this happened though, since it can be scary when it happens to you. It basically completely randomized whether the faces are in the inside or outside, so we need to fix that. Press Alt-N to bring up the normal menu, where we can tell it to recalculate whether the faces are on the inside or outside. Press Recalculate Outside, and it should be fixed. Normal is the special term for the direction a face is facing. If your model is ever having a shading glitch like this, or if things are weirdly sharp despite having a subdiv modifier, that's almost always because of the normals being weird, so that's when you should bring up this menu and recalculate outside. You can also just press Shift-N to do this really quick. Now just push and pull the verts as you want to create the shape of the eyelash. I like having eyelashes in general pinch inward towards the middle of the face, but stay fanned out towards the other side. Now we can add a solidify modifier to give it some thickness. Once you add it, move it to the subdiv modifier and let's mess with some settings. First for eyelashes, I like having the offset at 0, so it evenly spreads out the thickness on both sides. Then under the edge data dropdown, increase the crease inner and outer to either 0.5 or 1 depending on your preference. This adds a crease to the newly generated thickness, so it doesn't get totally smoothed out by the subdiv modifier, and I think it looks so much better. Now is the time to mess with the thickness you want in the end, since it looks way different than it would be before adding the creases. You can even add a make sharp edge to the edges of the eyelash, but if you don't want that to be perfectly sharp, you can add an edge loop to the middle of the eyelash to just slightly sharpen it out. Now add that black material you gave to the iris so it contrasts with the face. We'll fix another part of this later on, so pay attention to that. Now to keep tweaking. I realized I made it too long for the reference, so I moved that side up a bit. Then that revealed the ugly crease endpoint here, so I decided to just get rid of the crease. And then add a loop to the side of the eye, so it looks better. Sometimes you just have to wing it and go back on some of your original ideas. Also, I'm realizing the solidify modifier is acting really off, which is a sign that our object's scale is messed up. This is because we scaled it in object mode, and doing stuff like that can make things a little bit weird, like in this case with the solidify modifier. To fix it, select an object and then press Ctrl A to bring up the apply menu, and then apply or scale. The thickness instantly fixes itself. Since we took this from the head, that most likely means that the head is messed up too, so apply that one scale just in case. Then, same for the body, since it wasn't the same object group as the head. Now we're good. Now for some eyebrows. You want to do a similar thing with the eyelashes. On the head, select some faces around the brow area, Shift D to duplicate, then P to separate, then name them eyebrows. Now to shape them to fit the reference. Double tap G to slide the bottom edge up easily. Then we can add a solidify modifier like before, and move it above the subdiv like before. Edit the settings like before, and that should mostly be good. But since eyebrows are perfectly flat against the brow, let's add a shrink-wrap modifier too. That'll flatten them out, since we're shrink-wrapping after solidifying, so all that thickness gets flattened. So move it above the solidify modifier so it gets thicker after shrink-wrapping. The shrink-wrap and solidify modifiers are a great combo, since the extra thickness means you don't have to worry about the shrink-wrap's offset as much. Now you can make the right shape, since they will always stay locked to the head, even if you move them around. For the ears, you could extrude from the faces around the side of the head and go from there, but since our character is so stylized, let's take advantage of that with simpler ears that we just stick onto the side of the head. While in edit mode with the head, shift right click off to the left to move the 3D cursor there. Then add a cylinder. Before you move it, reduce its vertices to 8 since we only want a simple shape. And while you're here, change the cap fill from N-gon to triangle fan. Just so you know, N-gon is the term we use to refer to faces with more than 4 sides, since they all tend to work a bit weird. Think of it as a polygon with n amount of sides, like an unknown variable in algebra. Reapply shade smooth. Now scale the cylinder down flat. And alt-select the top loop, and extrude and scale inward. Now extrude again, but move the new loop down. Add a crease of 0.5 or 1 to each last loop you made, so the shape of this part of the ear becomes more defined, while the bottom part is still being smoothed out by the subdivision. If you want, you could even select the inner and bottom part and scale it in so it's more rounded. Once that's all done, scale it all down on the x-axis, so it's a slight oval. Now all you have to do is put it into place, rotating it slightly forward. That's all you really need for this guy. And the last 2 bits are the teeth and tongue. For the teeth, you can add a cube while still in edit mode with the head, since we want all the same modifiers, but select it with L and P to separate. You want to ignore all other parts of the model for now, so in object mode, with just the teeth selected, press Shift H to hide everything other than it, so we can focus on it. Delete the middle facing face, and move the 2 mirrored parts together to glue them. We actually want the same setup for the tongue too, so duplicate the object and move the dupe away for now. For the teeth, we want to extrude the outer face into a sort of horseshoe shape. Flatten it a bit on the y-axis. And the easiest way to do this is to select it, then hit numpad 7 to go into top view. Now we can just extrude, rotate, to create the shape from above really quickly. Because we're in orthographic view, all of those extrusions remain flat. And now what we can do is select the top edges and increase their edge crease to 1, since we don't want this part to be rounded at all. Then we can take the inner edge of the front part and Alt-S to scale it inward a tiny bit, so the front teeth are a bit sharper. Make sure all of that is how you want it, because we're now going to duplicate it for the jaw side of the teeth. Don't worry about it too much though, we don't need super complex teeth. Select it all with A, Shift D to duplicate, and then we need to type SZ-1. This will reverse everything on the Z axis, flipping it. We needed to do that instead of rotating it, since the mirror modifier wouldn't let us cross the middle line. Just to warn you though, doing that actually flips the faces inside out, which can screw with some things. So always make sure to have the flip part selected, then hit Alt-N to bring out the normals menu, so we can recalculate outside like we did with the eyelash. For the tongue, take that duplicate mirrored cube we made, and select its back faces. Press numpad 7 to go into orthographic mode again, and extrude backwards 2 times. Now select the whole thing, and just use the smooth tool to smooth it out, and scale on the Z-axis to flatten it. I'll make it curve up a bit too. It would be nice if we had that cartoony middle crease, so add a loop around the middle of these faces, so they can maintain their shape a bit when we add the crease. Select just the top edge of the middle, and give it a crease of 1, and make sharp. And then just move it down a bit. That should look pretty much how we want it. Again, you don't need to go crazy with it. Now let's put them in the mouth. Alt-H to unhide everything that was hidden. Quickly resize them so they aren't so big. And now we should press numpad 3 to go into side orthographic view. Obviously, we can't look through the head, so we need to press this little button on this bar to toggle X-ray mode. Now we can see where the inside of the mouth starts and ends, which means we can easily move the teeth and tongue where they should be. Just click multiple times on top of your object to select the stuff on the inside. Since the origin point is off, I'm going to move each part on top of it in edit mode, so I can rotate it normally in object mode. Now is the time to edit the size of the inner mouth and the teeth and tongue so they all work together. And that's the head completely done, except for the hair of course. That'll be the next video. We'll be doing the body and hands then too, but they'll be a lot quicker than the head, so see you then.